husband sold my identity to criminals. Now I'm involved in an extremely bad situation. Hello, my friends at Reddit. How are all of you doing? It's been a while since I have used this platform. I love listening to other people's stories and possibly giving some advice when anyone wants that. That's the reason why I've been so in love with this platform. I love this non-judgmental community. Today, I don't have any advice for anyone. Instead, I want to share my story with all of you. It's quite strange how life turns out. I used to read people's stories here and used to think, does that even happen in real life? Turns out it does happen, and I'm a prime example of that. Well, anyway, here's the tea, guys. I'm 26 years old and my name is Molly. I'm a married woman. My husband is the same age as me and goes by the name Trevor. I've known Trevor since we were in college together. We got married around 2 years back. We both were young and thought that we had found the love of our life. My husband owns a security company and the business pays pretty well. We were financially quite solid. Trevor told me that it's up to me whether I want to work or not. I told him that I cannot sit idle and need something to do. That's why I became a freelance writer. Our marriage has been pretty perfect, if I may say so myself, until I went and ruined it myself. Here's how it began. So when I went to college, I met my roommate, Christy. I was an introverted and shy girl, whereas Christy was the life of the party wherever she went. She was full of energy and always gained the crowd's attention in just mere minutes. Even though we had opposite personalities, we clicked instantly and became friends from the start of college. She never liked to leave me alone and took me to most of the events with her. It was because of her that I became social as well. I was still not a very outgoing person, but still it was an improvement from my previous self. I met Trevor at one such party. I was there with Christy, who introduced me to Trevor and Dan, her classmates. Truth to be told, I didn't even notice Trevor at first. My entire attention was focused on Dan. Dan was totally my type. You know, a little bit silent, tall, and handsome. We chatted for a while at that party, and I thought we had a genuine connection. We really understood each other, and we talked like we have known each other forever. That night when I was lying in bed, I thought of Dan, giddy with the thought that I finally found a romantic connection. I was pretty sure he was going to ask me out sooner rather than later. We had an insane chemistry at the party, and I was pretty sure he felt it too. I had multiple assignments that whole week, so I didn't accompany Christy anywhere. Unlike her, I actually needed the academic validation. It was finally Saturday when I got done with all the assignments and thought that I would finally meet Dan again. When I returned to the dorm, Christy was already getting ready for a party near our campus. She asked me which outfit is the best, and I helped her with that. She told me that she's really excited because her crush was coming to the party. I couldn't stop smiling because I was pretty sure that Dan was coming to the party as well. I told her mine too, and we both started laughing. We didn't discuss who our crush was and thought that we'll just introduce ourselves at the party. She helped me get ready in a really cute outfit. We both were all dressed up, and after clicking a few selfies, we made our way to the party. Christy told me that she's going to go find her crush and then bring him so I could meet him. She left, and then I kept looking for Dan. I was pretty sure that he would attend this party, but I still couldn't locate him anymore. After half an hour, Christy came back to me with her crush. I was really happy for my friend, but then I got the shock of my life when she came back with Dan. Dan was her crush. I had thought that we genuinely had a connection between us, but I was so wrong. It was clear that Christy's interest in him was reciprocated. He kept looking at her like she was the only girl in the room. She asked me where my guy was. I couldn't tell Christy that we both had a crush on the same guy. I was not that type of girl who would fight with her friend over a guy. So I just shrugged and told her that he hadn't come. She pouted but quickly let it go. Since Dan and I were already introduced, we didn't need that. We all talked for a bit, and then I excused myself and went to get a drink. It was then where I met Trevor. I had already let go Dan. We didn't have much going on anyways. We only met once. It was easier to forget about him. Trevor was kind and friendly to me. We talked a lot that night. I had a few drinks, so he also offered to drop me back to my dorm since Christy has already left with Dan. I felt like a fool for thinking that Dan was interested in me. He was just talking to me out of politeness because he was interested in my best friend. I didn't want to feel like a fool, so I just decided that it's best to forget about him and move on. Trevor was quite nice to me. When he dropped me at my dorm, I told him thank you and kissed him on the cheek. He asked for my number and we started texting after that. We texted quite a lot after that and soon got in a relationship after a few dates. While this was going on in my life, Christy and Dan also got serious with each other. A few times Christy suggested that we go on a double date, but I was just not interested. I didn't think that meeting Dan was a good idea, but Christy was quite adamant about it. We finally went to that double date. Even though I was happy with Trevor, I couldn't shake away the crush I felt for Dan. I still felt drawn to him. If he asked me something, I would get shy. I didn't like feeling that way. Who the hell has a crush on their best friend's boyfriend? I started avoiding Christy and Dan. Trevor didn't seem to mind it at all. Even though me and Christy were still friends, we weren't stuck to the hip then. Time passed by and we all graduated college. I'd forgotten about Dan and was happy in life with Trevor. We loved each other and he kept me happy. When he proposed to me to marry him, it was an instant yes. Life was going pretty well. Our marriage life was nothing but a bliss until it all fell apart. After college, both Christy and Dan had gotten a good corporate job. They got married soon after us. We even attended their wedding. The crush I had on Dan felt silly. I still found him good looking, but the crush felt so ancient I moved on from it. After college, everyone got busy in their life and we rarely met. But around a year ago, everything changed. Me and Trevor got into a huge ass fight. It wasn't like we didn't fight. We used to have our disagreements, but this fight was like nothing like the fights we used to have. So what really happened was that I felt that my husband was hiding something from me. His behavior had changed. He started coming home really late, and he started taking calls where I couldn't hear him. It was very different from his usual behavior. I felt it was really shady that my husband was hiding something from me. This continued on for weeks, but one day when I finally had enough of this, I confronted him and asked him what the hell was going on. He acted like I was overreacting and that there were no changes in his behavior. This annoyed me even more. I told him to cut the nonsense and be honest with me. He straight up denied everything and told me that I was making a fuss out of nothing. We kept screaming at each other. I told him that if he was cheating on me, he should tell me clearly. He got mad that I thought so low of him. When I asked him to see his phone, he kept on saying that he cannot give it to me. I was so sure that he was cheating on me. I even told him that he should leave me if he has to cheat on me. We both were really mad at each other. It was the biggest fight of our relationship. I couldn't stay in the same place as him, so I went out. I needed a drink, so I went to this bar. I just wanted to drink martini and swallow all my hurt and anger, but turned out the universe had plans for me. While I was having my drink in silence, I heard someone calling my name. This guy came to my side and just stood there. When I looked up at him, it was none other than Dan. Yeah, it was the same guy from college. He was surprised to see me there. He asked me what I'm doing at a bar so late at night. I told him that I just needed a drink. He asked where Trevor was. I told him we got in a fight. I was already a bit tipsy by then, so when he mentioned Trevor, I got a little emotional and had tears in my eyes. Dan didn't fail to notice that. He sat down by my side and started talking to me. He was trying to comfort me with random conversation and lame jokes, and I was grateful for that. I got more drunk while talking to him. We talked for a good time. I asked him what's going on with him. He told me that he had come to the bar with some client and was leaving when he saw me there. I asked him where Christy was. He told me that she is out of town for work and wouldn't be back to town for quite a few days. I listened to him talking and laughing, and it felt like my crush was coming to life again. He was just so gorgeous. I might have been a bit too drunk because I lost all my filters. We were talking about college parties when he mentioned that we also met at one such party. I told him I remember. I got a crush on him that day. He almost spilled his drink when I said that. I realized what I said, but it was too late to take it back. It took him a moment to process everything. He then shocked me even more when he told me that he had a crush on me too. He told me that he really liked me and was smitten by me at that party. I couldn't believe him. This guy liked me too. We could have been something. The next thing I know, I'm not in my seat anymore and we are kissing each other. I don't remember exactly who initiated it, but we were kissing passionately like it was one-in-a-lifetime kind of opportunity. Dan took me to his car and we hooked up there. It was like there was nothing in this world except us. I loved feeling that way. I used to think so much about him, and now I was finally with him. It seemed too good to be true. I'd forgotten everything at that moment. I didn't remember that I was married and someone's wife. After we were done with the deed, Dan asked me if I wanted to go to his house with him. I almost said yes, but then remembered that my husband was at home waiting for me. I told him that I needed to go home. He nodded in understanding and dropped me back home. I came home quite late at night and found Trevor to be sleeping in the bedroom. I was grateful that he was already asleep because I didn't know what I would have said to him if he was awake. I took a shower and went to sleep as well. I didn't want him to smell a man's cologne on me or something in the morning. I was still not really sober, so I just went to sleep. It wasn't until the morning when I woke up with a killing hangover that I realized what happened last night. I couldn't believe that I hooked up with someone else when I'm married. I felt like throwing up, especially when that someone else was my friend's husband. I was so mad at myself for doing what I did. But what was done, and there was no way I could undo it. All I could do was forget it and never remember it again. I got up from bed and went to the kitchen to get some water as I had a killer headache. Trevor was sitting at the stool when I entered the kitchen. He asked me where I was last night. He was still pissed about the fight we had the previous day. I just gave him a vague reply about needing fresh air. I didn't know if he bought my excuse or not, but he didn't push it, and I was so grateful for that. I was having a terrible headache already and couldn't deal with Trevor's questions. Later that day, I got a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, it was from Dan. He texted me telling me that he couldn't forget last night. It was not signed, but it was clear that it was Dan. Who else would text me that? Even though I couldn't forget that night as well, I didn't even want to think about it. I didn't want to destroy my house because of temptation. I decided to cut to the chase and texted Trevor that it was best we forget it and pretend that it never happened again. Dan texted me back that it was impossible for him to pretend that. He said he wanted more time with me. I kept telling him that it cannot happen again. He started calling me after that. Thankfully, Trevor was not at home that time. I picked up the call with the decision to tell him firmly to forget everything. But Dan had also thought the same thing. He started telling how life was giving us another chance to know what we could have been those years back. He said it was magic what happened between us, and we had to explore more of it now. I'm ashamed to admit that everything he said was so tempting that I was convinced. I told him that if we did this, then we had to make sure that this does not reach anyone. I didn't want our spouses to get to know this. Dan agreed immediately. He said he doesn't want Christy or Trevor to know this either. He said this will be just our secret. Dan told me that he will send me the location where we were going to meet the next day. The next day, after Trevor left for office. I got dressed and left for the location Trevor had sent me. It was a good location. It was on the very outskirts of the city. Noon came to this side, and I was so thankful for that. I parked my car next to Dan's truck. I then went to join him in his truck. He kissed me instantly, and soon we were making out. Making out with Dan was so fun. It was like the whole world used to blur out, and it was just us. And that's how my affair with Dan began. He used to find random locations where there were close to zero chances that anyone would see us. We didn't get any hotel room or anything because we didn't have any evidence of us being together anywhere. Christy came back to town after her work trip. Dan said that he was being careful and that no one will ever find out. He used to pick timings for us to meet when both Trevor and Christy were busy in their offices. I had thought that we will just continue to do this till we'll get this out of our system, and then just forget everything, but it was easier said than done. Every time I thought of putting an end to this, Dan would just say that he needs a bit more time, and then would give me a kiss, which made me feel like I needed more time too. We gave ourselves an ultimatum of 6 months. We had decided that we'll do all of this either in 6 months or even before that. Me and Trevor had started being distant with each other after that fight. Part of the reason was also that I used to feel guilty in front of him, but that fight had created a big distance between us. I suspected that it was another woman, but I was involved with another man as well, so I stopped prying at what he was doing. We just maintained our distance. It was so contrast to what we used to be earlier in our marriage. One day, Trevor told me that he was going out of town due to work reasons. This gave me another idea. I was tired of meeting Dan just in his truck. I needed more time with him and somewhere out of a vehicle. When I told him this, he didn't agree at first. He said there was a lot of risk, but after a bit of convincing, he agreed. After Trevor left in the morning, I told Dan to come over. I had switched off the security cameras placed outside our home. It was all clear. Dan came over soon after Christy left for work. I took Dan to the guest room. I was so happy to have him there. We hooked up and Dan left shortly after. Trevor was gone for 2 days, so the next morning I insisted to Dan that he comes over again. He was a bit hesitant of us getting caught, but still agreed. He came over and we went to the guest room. I was so lost at that moment that I didn't notice when the front door opened. Dan was on top of me when the door to the guest room opened and Trevor walked in on us. As soon as the door opened, we froze. Trevor wasn't supposed to come back home till the next day. I was so shocked to see him there. He was just as shocked or maybe even more. Before I could say anything to him, he just slammed the door and went out. Dan quick rolled off me and I got dressed and ran after Trevor. He was not in the living room. I went outside to look for him, but his car was also not there. Dan came out as well. We both had ruined our home. We didn't say anything to each other and then he just left. He probably went to Christy to make sure Trevor doesn't reach her before him. I kept calling Trevor because I was scared that he doesn't do anything rash. He had always had a temper, and I didn't want him to do something irrational. He never picked up my call. Dan called me later to tell me that Trevor had called Christy and now she was furious at him. He said that we cannot talk again, and I just hung up on him, already knowing what he said. I kept waiting for Trevor to come back home, but he didn't. The entire day passed like that. I even called his friends and in his office, but no one knew where he was. I fell asleep on the couch only while I was waiting. It was around midnight that Trevor finally got back home. He was mad as hell. When I tried to go near him, he just pushed me away. I tried to say something, but he told me to keep my mouth shut. He said he had seen enough and there's nothing I could say to him which would make it okay. To be honest, I understood his anger. It was very well justified, but I still didn't want it to end our marriage. I know it was very selfish of me, but I just couldn't watch my house get destroyed just like that. I kept telling Trevor how it was just a temptation and meant nothing else. I tried to reason with him how it was just physical. There were no emotions involved. It was the wrong thing to say because when I said it, he got even more upset. He threw away the vase kept on the table and told me to get out of his house by the next morning. I told him that he cannot kick me out of the house. We had built the house together. I had designed everything by myself. We had so many memories here, but he just laughed and said that if I didn't, I'll have to face the consequences in a much worse way. He said that and stormed to the bedroom. I sat in the living room with my head in my hands. The reality that I had ruined my life finally sunk in. I ruined my beautiful marriage just because of a meaningless affair. I thought that I deserved one more chance. One small mistake cannot end all those years I had spent with Trevor. I thought that his anger might cool down a bit in the night, and then I can try to convince him in the morning about me giving me one more chance. I decided that I was going to give all my efforts if Trevor decided to give me one more chance. I decided to not leave the house like he had asked and instead to stay and try to talk to him. The next morning, when Trevor woke up and found me downstairs, he got pissed. Like really, really pissed. He asked in a very harsh tone what I was still doing here. I told him we needed to talk, but he just said that I should have talked to him before going to bed with another man. I told him to listen to me just one time, but he was not interested. He was just screaming how I betrayed him, and that too with his friend. He even abused Dan and said how we both were disgusting human beings. He asked me how I could do that to him. I had no answer for his question, so I just stood there with my head down. He looked at me with so much hatred in his eyes and told me how he came home earlier because he wanted to spend some quality time with me, but never knew that I was such a horrible person. Yet, he told me to leave his place as soon as possible and to never show him my face again. He himself brought my suitcase and asked me to get out of there. I was ashamed and embarrassed that I was being thrown off like that. I was humiliated enough and decided it was best if I left then. I thought that maybe staying time apart will give him some perspective and he'll forgive me. I left the house and went to stay at my sister's place in the same town. She was really mad at me that I cheated on my husband, but because she was my only sibling, she had to come to my rescue. I decided that I'll stay at her place for a few days, and then maybe I'll go back and live with Trevor or find something else of my own. I kept texting Trevor, hoping for a reply or something, but I didn't hear even a peep from him. He used to see my texts but never respond. A few days passed like this and I was already a mess. I missed Trevor. My mind kept going back to the time when we were together and happy. It seemed like such a long time ago. I was genuinely regretting what I had done. I thought I was in my lowest phase of my life. I had lost my husband and my home. I didn't think anything much worse could have happened, but I was turned wrong. It had been 2 weeks since I went to a coffee shop to get a coffee. I was sitting in the coffee shop when a strange man came and sat in front of me. I was quite shocked as to what was happening when he called me by my name and said hello. He gave me a smile which really creeped me out. I asked him how he knew me. He didn't reply to my question. He told me that he is from a bank. I had never heard of that bank. Yeah. He said they have been trying to contact me for a week, but I never gave them any reply. I didn't understand why these people wanted to contact me. I didn't have a bank account in their name. I asked him what he wanted to talk about. He brought out an envelope and told me that he wanted to give this to me. He said they went to my mentioned address, but they were told I don't live there anymore. I was still confused as to what the hell this guy was talking about. I opened the envelope and found a credit card bill in my name. It listed so many expenses that I got a whiplash. The total amount was $50,000. I told this guy that it was a mistake, and they must be looking for someone else because it cannot be me. I told him that I didn't have a bank account in their bank. He looked at me like I was kidding. He said he was not mistaken and showed me my bank details. There was an account in my name with all my IDs. IDs I didn't bring with me and were still at home with Trevor. The bank guy continued telling me that they would have emailed me or texted me a message, but the email address was not in use anymore, and the phone number given wasn't in service anymore either. I was baffled with everything that was happening. How can I get a debt of $50,000 without even spending anything? I told him that I'll get back to him. He told me that I had a month to pay the entire amount. He just wanted to deliver the bill in person. I knew I wanted answers, and the only person who could give them to me was Trevor. I called a cab and went to the house. Trevor was not there, and the main gate was locked up. I had to find him somehow, so I went to his office, but he wasn't even there. I asked everyone where he was, but no one really knew. I kept calling Trevor, but he didn't pick up. It was almost evening, so I went back to my sister's place. I took out my laptop and researched more about the bank. Turns out it was one of those banks where you can easily open an account with basic documents. I went through their policies and saw that they were very strict with their policies about debt, just like most banks. They didn't even have that installment system. It meant that I had to deposit the entire amount in just one go, and that too in just 1 month. Trevor had to explain this to me. I kept calling him and leaving texts, but I got nothing but silence. I decided to go to the house the next day, and in the early morning before Trevor goes anywhere. I didn't have this much amount with me. How the hell was I supposed to pay this amount? The next morning I left for home and Trevor was in the house only. I asked him what the hell was going on. He asked me why I came back here. I told him to first tell me why there was a debt of $50,000 on my name, and that too from a bank whose name I had never heard of. When he heard this, he finally smiled like he had gotten something he wanted. He said that it took them quite long to figure out my location. I looked at him with confusion. He just shrugged and started telling me that I should be more careful. Identity theft is getting quite serious these days. I told him to not feed me that nonsense. All my IDs and documents were kept here only. How could someone use them to open a bank account in my name? He smiled and said that maybe I gave it to them. I was shocked to hear this. My husband had given my identity to criminals. I asked him why he would do that and why did he even know people like that. He said that I was forgetting that owns a security company, which meant that he knew all kinds of people. He asked me if I remembered when I was doubting him and thinking that he was having an affair because he was always on his phone or in his office. It was because he was tracking these group of cyber criminals who were stealing people's IDs and committing financial frauds with them. I was still processing everything when Trevor continued telling me that when he saw me with Dan, he knew he wanted to see me suffer, and that's when he contacted them and gave them all my IDs. I asked him what he would get out of this. Why was he being like this? He got angry as he remembered something and then said that I betrayed him and broke his trust. He said I deserved it for hurting him like that. He kept telling me how he wanted to build a complete life of luxuries for me, but I gave up everything for just a meaningless affair. The anger and hurt in his voice were so evident that I couldn't stop crying. He told me that I should not waste my crocodile tears. It does nothing to him. He told me that I should get out and never try to contact him again. I was just leaving the house when he told me that I should keep checking my bank account statements. I thought that was a very specific and weird thing to say. As soon as I left the house, I opened my phone and checked the balance of my personal account. This was my personal account, and all the money from my freelancing work was credited to this account. I didn't have a habit of checking my bank balance regularly, but I still knew that there should be a decent amount in this account. Imagine my horror when I found out that my bank account was in the negative. I checked the transactions and saw that someone had withdrawn all the money from the account using my credentials. I was so hurt and pissed that I started crying right there. I didn't think anything worse could happen when Trevor threw me from the house, but this was nothing I could have thought of. In the span of a few days, I had lost my husband, became homeless, and now I was broke with a debt of $50,000. I couldn't stop crying. I had no effing clue what I was going to do. I somehow controlled myself and went back to my sister's place. She got worried when she saw me with puffy eyes. I told her everything. She told me that we could file a complaint, but I told her it wasn't going to do us any good. These are really sharp cyber criminals. They covered their tracks well, and there was nothing that we could do now. She calmed me down and told me that we'll figure something out. I just kept crying in her arms. Few days passed like this. After that day when Trevor caught us, I had not heard a word from Dan or Christy. I wouldn't have called him, but I was desperate for help and thought that maybe I could get a loan from him. When I called him, he picked up, but his tone was completely different from what it used to be with me. He asked me quite harshly why I had called him. I was quite taken aback with his tone, but still told him that I needed his help. He said that he cannot do anything. He had finally convinced to give him another chance. She had forgiven him, but if she found out that he talked with me, she was going to lose her mind. She told me that I should not call him again, or he will block me. The guy who convinced me to have an affair with me was telling me that he was going to block my number. I was officially at rock bottom. There was no one who was going to help me. I decided to get whatever work I could get to take it. If everything was already not enough, Trevor also sent me divorce papers. His lawyer said I could contact my lawyer, but I didn't have any money to afford a lawyer and then seek alimony. I didn't have the energy for that, so I just signed wherever they asked. They said that they'll contact me as and when required. So yeah, that's it, guys. That's the summary of everything that had happened in the past days. From having a sweet and a perfect wedding life, I got to this homeless and broke life. Karma is really real. It got me back from my affair with Dan. Even though I'm really hurt with what Trevor had done with me, I couldn't fault him. When he loved me with everything. So how could I expect him to take his revenge half-heartedly? He wasn't that type of guy to do things half-heartedly. Currently, I'm working non-stop at writing for small companies. It's nearly not enough for what I need right now, but it's still better than nothing. I'm still crashing at my sister's place. It was a good thing that she lived alone. Otherwise, I didn't know what I was going to do. Currently, I have no idea what is going to happen, so I'm just figuring out one day at a time. Thank you guys for listening to my story. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them here.